All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to be looking at the Black Plague, or the Black Death, or the bubonic plague in the middle to late ages of European history here. Kind of a cool subject. Very, very popular, very morbid at the same time. So what I have here, I got our textbook here. This is on page 28 of the PDF, and in the textbook, page 161. And so basically, like before, I'm just going to read aloud the textbook here and kind of fill in some little details, show you some other pictures too. All right, let's get started. Here we go. The Black Death. In the middle of the 14th century, a Western Europe experienced a disaster so great that many people thought the end of the world had come. Italian trading ships returning from ports on the Black Sea brought back one of the most devastating disease epidemics in history, the Black Death. The Black Death was a variety of bubonic plague. It spread from victim to victim through the fleas on rats, which lived on medieval ships and throughout towns and cities. The diseased person quickly developed buboes, swollen lymph glands. So those are they're in your neck, they're in your underarms, they're actually all over your body. But those are the easiest ones to see. And was covered with dark blotches on the skin. Then the patient would be stricken with a high fever and begin vomiting blood and hallucinating. So hallucinating, there's two types. There's your visual hallucinations, where you're seeing things that aren't real, or you could also hear things, auditory hallucinations. And so you could hear things that aren't actually there. Most victims died within 1 to 3 days. In some village and towns, the sick and dying outnumbered the healthy. That's pretty drastic, right? Medieval medicine had no cure for the disease. Doctors recommended burning sulfur and smelling garlic as ways of preventing the spread of the plague. Neither was helpful. Probably 25 million people, about 1/3 of all the people in Europe, died from this plague. Thousands of villages became ghost towns, not reappearing until centuries later when the outlines were revealed through aerial photographs taken during the Second World War. The Black Death brought out the best and the worst in people. Many priests, nuns, and doctors died because they spent so much time tending to the sick. At the other extreme, some parents abandoned their sick children, and thieves robbed corpses or broke into houses where everyone had died. Groups of religious fanatics called flagellants traveled from town to town, spreading the idea that the plague was a punishment from God. So that's an interesting idea, religion creeping back into it. I want to show you a couple pictures here. This is probably something that you've seen, especially around Halloween. This is something called a plague doctor. Now, back in the medieval days, the doctors would dress in this protective clothing, and they'd wear this almost ceremonial mask that was in the shape of a crow's face, a crow's beak, right? And so they'd have gloves, they'd have this protective cover, protective hat. They'd wear this mask, and inside the beak here, they would fill it with all different kinds of herbs and spices to help filter the air that they are breathing when they went into sick people's houses. They also carry this long, it's almost like a staff, but this is so they could check patients without actually physically touching them with their hands. They could use the staff to poke and prod them and to check them without actually having to touch them, which is kind of cool. Let's go back here. You can see here at the bottom of the page, there's a picture here where a doctor is putting a small cut into this big inflamed lymph node. And so it'd get big and inflamed, and they'd put a little tiny cut in it to drain all the fluid. And here they're doing the same thing. They're doing it in the guy's armpit. So they'd put a little cut into his armpit, and they drain all that fluid out. And of course, it's not like the hospitals today, right? You'd have people oozing out infected fluids all over town. So the plague would spread even faster. Let's scroll down here. These maps show kind of a timeline of how the plague spread through Europe. You can have a look at these. Another image we're going to talk about is Boccaccio's Decameron. So I'm going to read here. Images of the plague haunted artists of the late Middle Ages. The Dance of Death, a popular theme in paintings, shows grinning skeletons leading people from the different classes of society to their graves. The figure of death became a common character in stories. The Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio used the Black Death as a background for his collection of stories called Decameron, written in 1353. In Decameron, 10 young people flee the plague-stricken city of Florence to stay in a country estate until the epidemic had ended. To pass the time, they hold a contest to see who can tell the best story. In the opening chapter of this book, Boccaccio tells about the ravages of the Black Death in Florence. Even though this passage comes from a work of fiction, historians consider it a primary source material because it was written by an eyewitness to the plague. Explain why those with little money presented a more pathetic spectacle. So again, primary source is a resource written by someone who actually saw the event. That's a primary. I'm going to read this part too. This is the primary source from Boccaccio. As for the common people and a large portion of the bourgeois, the middle class, they presented a much more pathetic spectacle. For the majority of them were constrained, they were forced, either by their poverty or the hope of survival, to remain in their houses. Being confined to their own parts of the city, they fell ill daily in the thousands. And since they had no one to assist them or attend to their needs, they inevitably perished almost without exception. Many dropped dead in the open streets, both by day and by night, whilst a great many others, though dying in their own houses, drew their neighbors' attention to the fact that more by the smell of their rotting corpses than by any other means. And what with these and the others who were dying all over the city, bodies were here and there and everywhere. I'll show you. So here's kind of an example of some art that was influenced by the Black Plague or the Black Death. Now, this is a pretty grimly scene. You're going to notice if you look really close, there are a lot of skeletons, and this kind of tends to the idea of the Grim Reaper. You can see the bodies piled up here, bodies burning, skeletons leading off, church members. It's pretty grimly stuff. I hope real life wasn't this grim. Back then, there's also a form of social distancing, just like we're doing right now, that kind of came natural to people when this kind of epidemic struck Europe and so many people were dying. People naturally kind of locked themselves into their houses and in the streets to help kind of cleanse the area. they'd burn these great bonfires with spices and herbs and all sorts of things to kind of thwart away the disease. Good. So the effects of the Black Death on economics. This is on 164. The Black Death changed Europe forever, not by killing so many people, but also by damaging the feudal system. Feudalism, as we saw in chapter 2, was based on farming. The growth of towns and trades had already weakened the system. After the Black Death, labor was in such a short supply that workers could travel from estate to estate and ask for higher wages. So there's the people needed workers so bad, it actually gave you the opportunity. You could go from estate to estate and ask for a higher wage. They were so desperate for workers. Because of the labor shortage, this brought about, and the rise in wages, the Black Death caused many feudal estates to go bankrupt. So on this page, this is page 165. You can see kind of the expenses of an estate that had 200 serfs live and work this manner. I won't go too much into it, but you can see how much money they're dealing with. And after the Black Death, good. I'm going to leave it there. We'll talk about the Peasants' Revolt a little bit later. For now, you can just fill out all the questions that I have put into the Google Doc about the Black Death and submit those. I hope you guys like the videos. I'll keep trying to make them better, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.